Hiya, pals! Welcome to the Mouse Bytes podcast! Here we go!
Hello and welcome to Mouse Bytes, the show all about Disney video games, past and present. This is episode 18 and I'm your host, Jeph, and today I'm joined as always by my co-host, Clay. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Doing great.
Good. I don't know about you, but summer is coming to an end. Quickly. It's really warm here right now, though, for some reason.
Yeah,
so.
It's been a brutal week. We were in the upper 90s this week here, so it's I will welcome the end of summer welcome fall and all that.
Totally. Yeah, me and my wife went camping over the weekend. We're like, it'll be fine. And then it was like 10 o'clock at night, and I'm just rolling back and forth in my tent. I can't fall asleep because I'm just too warm, and I was like,
oh man,
this sucks. So yeah, I don't know. The weather though is perfect for the game we're talking about today. It's almost like we're on an island battling pirates or something.
Yeah, that kind of works out. It's a good summer game right here. This week we are covering Goof Troop for the SNES or SNES or SNES. Depending on what you want to call it, but Goof Troop. So as always, we'll start off with what the heck is this game? You want to kind of start us off with that?
Yes, I will do that. This game is basically Zelda: Link to the Past, but with two-player. This really is the big part of it is that it is a co-op, two-player game, which not a ton of those on the SNES, at least like good ones. But yeah, it really feels like they took the main mechanics that you have in Link to the Past, as far as like picking up pots and throwing them, and that it really is kind of the whole gist of this game, mixed also with some puzzle elements, which are also kind of somewhat in Link to the Past as well. So that seems to be the big one people compare it against. There's a couple other games that have these like sliding block puzzles in them, and this is kind of part of that too. But yeah, top down view kind of thing. So pretty unique, even though it is very similar to Link to the Past, I would say. So
yeah, I think it varies itself just enough to where it's not a Link to the Past clone. Like the you can only hold two items, but it's like you can't hold them in your like reserves, so like you have to leave something and then kind of go back and pick it up or swap it or whatever. So there's different elements like that. There's no primary weapon, and so it's kind of creative enemy elimination, stuff like that. So there's enough variation in my opinion.
Definitely. Yeah, I'd agree.
So yeah, this game was developed by Capcom. It was released in July 11th of 1993. So kind of like a midlife cycle Super Nintendo game. Interestingly enough, I think it was one of the last Disney licensed games of the Capcom Nintendo era. Not really much reason for that. I don't think. I've never really heard any story of a fallout between Nintendo and Capcom or anything like that. It was just what happened. Interestingly enough, was one of the first games designed by Shinji Mikami, who went on to direct Resident Evil, which came out in 1996, so just really 3 years after this. Big jump long there. Between that game and this one, or this one and that one. Some other fun facts. Do you want to take those? Do you want me to keep going?
So this game only came out on the SNES. It didn't come out on Genesis, so it was, specific to this console. I guess the only other thing really interesting worth noting, the Japanese version of this game had a difficulty setting not seen anywhere else, with higher difficulties, having harder versions of the block puzzles, as well as blocks being moved to different locations to make defeating enemies much more difficult, basically. And so something we didn't see in the US, probably would have been a welcome addition, just because this game, once you beat through it, there really isn't much reason to go back into it. And so I could see a higher difficulty, being nice back then. But no, just randomly also wanted to mention I love Capcom and I love their Disney games. In fact, their Mickey games are like my favorites. So this one is different enough than those, but even some of like the sound effects and the music in it just really make me excited to cover those games on the show, because they all feel very similar, but they're all just so top notch, really good. And so good old Capcom. It was kind of a bummer. I think they did some games after the Super Nintendo that were Disney, but they were like really lackluster, like point and click games or something. Yeah. So and obviously their NES games, DuckTales and all that stuff were super high quality as well. So we're still in the golden years, thankfully, here, but not for much longer. So
yeah. Yep, definitely. It's interesting about the difficulty thing. I don't know if the Japanese version came out later. I don't have a release date on that. But, if it was just something they just sort of had the time to add, or if it was kind of along the lines of like Super Mario Brothers 2 in Japan versus, what became known as the Lost Levels here, where they just thought it would be too hard for Western audiences and they just opted not to do it for us. I don't know enough there, but it was an unfortunate thing of the time. The games industry was newish and wasn't really standard set yet. So anyway, it's too bad. I kind of want to go back and play the Japanese one now and try the harder difficulty.
I'm good.
You're good.
I felt like this one was plenty challenging for me. So
yeah, fair enough. So speaking of this game or whatever, I guess not really speaking of anything, but do you have any history or nostalgia with this game prior to recording this episode?
I'll give you props for trying the segue there.
Yeah, I lost it. I was like, man, where am I going to take this?
Yes, history with this game. This is oddly a game I really hadn't heard of until we started the show. And then out of nowhere, I kind of started hearing about it a lot.
Dude, me too.
Yeah, and I think we kind of finally were like, dude, have you heard of this game? And you're like, yeah, it's weird. I keep hearing rumblings of it. But I think the first time I ever saw something about it, I was either watching like a YouTube video about Disney games, or it was like underrated SNES games, or like the best co-op SNES game, some video like that. And this game got brought up and I was like, interesting. That actually looks decent. And then I may have gone and like tested it out on a ROM to see what it was like. And then I think a short time after that, it was brought up on one of the podcasts that you and I listened to, and a guy was raving about it, I think from IGN. And so it was just I'm like, wow, people keep bringing this up. It must be actually pretty good. And so finally, we were like, all right, well, eventually, we talked about putting it on the schedule here. Finally, we put it on the schedule. And so I'm like, all right, I need to get a copy of this game. This is one that it looks like I would really like to have my own copy of. So I bought a copy, and then very shortly after I bought it, I realized it was not an original copy before I'd even gotten it. And I was like, oh, it looked too nice and the price was too good.
Yeah.
Because I think this game has risen in popularity over the last few years, and so the price has risen, not astronomically, but it's probably not as cheap as it had been in many years past. But anyway, I ended up getting it, and it works fine, and it's a good-looking copy. Yeah, it's not original, but it plays it fine, and so, I'll be like, all right, that's fine. I'll just never resell it and hold on to it, and it'll be my own little thing. I would have liked to have had an original copy, but that's all right. So really just in preparation for this episode has been the majority of my time playing it. So this is really kind of a first time for me playing through. So unfortunately, I only got to play this in single player. I wish that me and Jeph lived closer to each other so we could play together, but that was not possible. And I might have been able to convince my wife to play this, but she probably wouldn't have had the best time. Not that there's anything wrong with the game, but so I pretty much played this only in single player, unfortunately. But we can talk more about that later. Jeph, what about you?
Well, my story is almost identical to yours in that regard. Pretty much had never heard of it, didn't know about it, and then you mentioned it not too long, after we started working on this show or whatever. And then, like, my favorite YouTube personality, this guy I watch who does, like, Mario Maker runs, just randomly put up an episode where he did a race of the game with another YouTuber. And
that's right. I forgot
and
about
I was
that.
like, what? And then that same week, literally that same week, on the IGN podcast that we listened to, they mentioned it as well, or it was like the trivia question or something. Like, they were talking very fondly of it, and I was like, are you kidding me? Like, never heard of this game. And then all of a sudden it's just from all angles I'm hearing about it. And so that was kind of my first exposure to it, and I was like, oh, this looks really cool. And so I checked it out pretty much at that point. And then played it for the first time just in preparation for this episode, and I really liked it. So
yeah, I think this game is one of those that in recent years people have been like, hey, have you heard of this game? Like, it's totally like underrated, because people love finding like hidden gems from consoles. And I think this is one of those that maybe people weren't talking about 10 years ago, but now it's like, hey, there's this really cool game. It's actually pretty fun, and it's still pretty cheap. Like, I think people like that. It's like, there's this good game and you can still get it for cheap. And then people are like, whoa.
Totally.
And then eventually it's not cheap anymore. But so yeah, it's kind of had a resurgence in recent years, which is pretty cool. Like, I'm glad to see games like this that, like, heck, I hadn't heard of it and I had no idea it existed. And you wouldn't think that a game like this would be decent, because it is, after all, based on I guess it could be, but no offense, it's based on, like, the TV show. And so I
think people would just expect it to be like, your run-of-the-mill platformer with no depth,
Right,
and
exactly.
The fact that it's like just this unique-ish, I mean, it's got influences from Zelda, but much more unique than most of the other Capcom games and stuff like that. Like, it was a pleasant surprise.
Totally. Yeah. So, I don't know. If you're listening to this episode and you've never played this game and you've listened this far, if this hasn't piqued your interest, I don't know what will, because I agree with Jeph. I think it is really unique. And, you can draw parallels to other games. But really, when you look at it compared to most other licensed things like this, based on a cartoon from, like, Saturday morning or in the afternoon or whatever, I would say it's pretty unique on its own. So, it was fun. It was fun I was curious to see past the first couple areas, because that's really as far as I had taken it. So I was curious to see how in depth it would go. So
totally. Well, that seems like as good a time of any to jump into our gameplay discussion. Alrighty, so for the gameplay discussion, as always, we will discuss the game's visuals, the audio, the actual gameplay, difficulty, and the story. So with that, we will kick it off with visuals. I'll go ahead and start off with that. The visuals of this game are great. I really like the kind of cartoony look of it. It is a great looking Super Nintendo game. Maybe not super advanced or super great, but considering time period and, it's the pre Donkey Kong Country pre-rendered era. It's got good looking sprites, good looking color palette. The character models all look good. They're cute. They're not identical to the cartoon per se, but they're a little bit stylized, almost kind of not sure what you would describe them as, but it looks good. And then, as we've said before, it's kind of that top-down Zelda looking view where it's the walls all kind of point down towards the middle, so it's not like you're at an angle or isometric or anything. It's it's got that 3D look that you're up in the sky.
Right.
What are your thoughts on the graphics?
Yeah, I think they're awesome. Super colorful, which is nice. I mean, it's you got your you're in the tropics, starting out, so automatically you just got your bright blues and your bright greens, so it's just really, really pops. This is set in the, I guess you could say, the Goofy universe or whatever, and so pretty much everybody is this, like, I don't even know what you call them. They all have like black noses.
Yeah.
They're all kind of like
Doggish. And,
right.
Yeah.
And so, like, even the bad guys who are pirates still, have big, long dog noses and stuff. And so, yeah, it all seems very familiar, though.
Yeah.
It's got its Zelda thing going on where, if they don't want you going in this area, there's a tree there, so don't go there. So it all seems pretty familiar, which honestly makes it easier to just kind of pick up and go, which is nice.
Yeah.
And then the information that the game puts you up at the top visually is not too distracting, and it's informative and kind of keeps out of your way, so you feel like you have a nice big, open view of what's going on and stuff, which I appreciate.
Yeah.
And one thing visually I didn't really care for is there are no maps. So
yeah,
you
that's
can't
a
really
good point.
see what's been explored or where you've been, and I don't know, that's one Zelda thing I was like, where's the map button?
Yeah, that would have really benefited from that.
Yeah, and so maybe you don't consider that visually like a thing we're saying, but I don't know, sometimes I struggle with Zelda games that are these isometric top-down ones or whatever.
Yeah.
I get lost, or I don't know where I've been, or I see an area that I can't get to, but I don't know how to get to it. And so there were points in this game where I was just like, I don't know what to do. But really, for the most part, I feel like they did a pretty good job making it relatively clear where you're supposed to be heading. Other thing worth mentioning, throughout the different levels, there are different themes, obviously. It's usually how levels are, and so they do a good job visually changing it up. It starts out bright and happy, and then it gets the overall visual tone gets more dark and moody towards the end and stuff. And so I think they did a pretty good job with that.
Yeah.
So yeah, visually I think this is a great looking game.
Agreed. Yeah. Not too much more than that. It's like I agree with you. Like the UI, the information that's displayed is nice and basic and small. It's not. There were some games at the time where it was just kind of overly large user interface, kind of at the top often or the bottom of the screen, and this one keeps it pretty simple. You see kind of your icon of your character, how many lives you've got, your 2 items, and then some like hearts and stuff, but that's pretty much it. Yeah, so next after that we'll discuss the audio of the game, and right off the bat, there's one thing that really bothered me about the audio, and it's just this really high-pitched sound that plays every time you kill an enemy. My wife, even as I was playing it last night, she's like, make sure you call out how awful that sound is. And
Nice.
So, yeah, it's every time you kill an enemy, it just is like, "Doo." I'll play that clip right now when we're editing this. Isn't that awful? Yeah.
Yeah. That's awesome that your wife. I love it when my wife interjects and like,
Yeah.
oh, that, and so you always know,
Yeah.
like, all right, must not be pretty good. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's an interesting choice. In fact, it reminds me, it's similar to a sound in this arcade game. I think it's Galaga, when like ships drop down.
Yeah.
It sounds very similar to
You know
that.
what it's also similar to is level 2. Yeah, level 2 of Donkey Kong Arcade, when those things are like hopping along the top and then they drop.
Oh,
Like,
maybe that's what I'm thinking of.
Well, I think it might also be in Galaga. Now that you've mentioned that, we'll have to go back and play those as well. But
It's totally
just,
right.
It's just obnoxious. It just plays way too often and is just like a shrill shrieking sound.
Yeah,
So, could have done without that.
totally.
But beyond that, I like the music of the game. I like the sound effects. Other than that, pretty Zelda sounding with some of the item sound effects that I'm thinking of.
Yeah, like the bell. The bell sounds like something from Zelda.
Yeah, and like the hookshotty thing, the grappling hook sounds kind of like the hook shot. Not a whole lot of depth to it beyond that I can really think of. And the music, unfortunately / fortunately, is it's all original. That I can tell it's not really inspired by the show.
Nope.
Which is unfortunate. I know we always talk about this. Like, I would love to have had the show theme song just on the title screen, but it's not there.
Yeah.
I don't know that it's pretty basic background music where it doesn't really, none of it stood out to me per se, none of the little melodies, but it never got repetitive or intrusive, which is a good thing. I don't know. What are your thoughts on the music or any of the sound effects?
Music wise, I really like the songs. I think they're really good. I think they do get a little too repetitive.
Do you? Okay.
But like what's there, I think is really good. I just feel like they could have done with a little bit more.
Sure.
Just for how the length of the levels and stuff. I felt like once you went to the next level, you didn't hear that song again, which was nice.
Yeah.
And there's different boss music and stuff, which was nice as well. So really, like I thought they were super catchy. But I mean, if you're sitting there, playing with a friend or something, you probably wouldn't even notice it because you're kind of communicating and talking,
right.
so you probably wouldn't even think about it. But if you're just sitting there with the volume turned up real loud, it might get old eventually, especially if you die or it takes you a little longer if you don't know where you're heading in the level and stuff. But but still, I thought like really high quality Capcom style music. So
totally.
I was totally all right with that.
Yeah, I think maybe is that I didn't really get to the later levels when I was playing, and the puzzles I saw in playthroughs like get much harder the further you get.
Right.
So when you're just there trying to solve a single puzzle, it I could see it getting kind of redundant. So yeah, because I kind of zipped through the first 2 levels and then I died, got a game over, and I was like, okay, well, I've got the gist of this, but so
yeah. As far as sound effects go, outside of the one you're talking about, I think the rest of them are pretty brilliant, actually. Which is another testament, I think, to Capcom. Like the little trumpet sound that plays when you get extra lives or extra continues are like super epic, and even just like the level select screen, or the option select at the beginning when it has like these beeps and boops that are just really iconic and just feel, I don't know, they just make me feel super nostalgic for quality SNES games. So honestly, I think some of the best sound effects we've had in games in a while, outside of the enemy killing sound, I would say. So.
Yeah, no, I think that's totally fair, and I agree. But beyond that, not super deep. So there we have it with the audio. So next is the gameplay / difficulty. As we've mentioned already and at the top of the show, that the gameplay is pretty much Zelda-esque, walking around a top-down 2D area and solving little block sliding puzzles for the most part. There's some keys, and I don't want to call it like maze elements. There's never really anything that's a maze, but sort of in the grander scale of the area, it's kind of like knowing which screen to go to next in the order that you need to. Example early on is you need to go find a specific item that you need to create a bridge, and then go back or backtrack if you've already gone to the other area to make the bridge to get across to get this other item, or to get this key to then go to this other area. And in that part, it's kind of like you have a central screen, and then you can go left, up, or right, and you just need to do it in the right order. So that comprises, I think, the gist of most of the gameplay. There's different things later on where you've got the spotlight effect, again similar to Zelda, where it's dark and you can only see just a little bubble around you. There's obviously the combat elements we talked about is just picking up and throwing things because there's no primary weapon. Some of the items you pick up, like the grappling hook, can stun enemies, so there's a little bit of gameplay strategy to that because fortunately, for the most part, you can outrun enemies, which I think is great. I hate games where you either run the same speed as or slower than enemies, and it's frustrating. So it's like you can kind of use the stun and then get away and then position yourself around an obstacle. The enemy AI is pretty smart for a Super Nintendo game, where they don't just, kamikaze right at you. They have a visual cone, so to speak, and they've got a little bit of randomness to their marching around the screen when they're just droning, and then if you get within their bubble of visual whatever, then they'll kind of pursue you. Interestingly enough, there's an item that's a bell, and that summons all enemies to kind of go after you, which is really cool. In strategizing using like the blocks, for example, you can kind of get yourself positioned or get the blocks positioned and then ring the bell. The enemies will kind of funnel into wherever you are based on your position, and then you can just kick the block and kill all the enemies and one fell swoop. So that's makes the gameplay a lot deeper than maybe it looks at the surface. Also, as far as like picking up stuff, items, you can just hit that button when there's not something in front of you, and your character will raise their hand, and you can actually catch things that are being thrown either by enemies or by other, if you're in 2-player, you can throw stuff to each other and catch it. It's kind of cool that you have to put your hands up to do that. Like, it's an extra thing that probably wasn't necessary, that it's a switch state as far as like either your hands are up or down, whereas, it can either just auto catch or, it's a button press where when you press it, they would lift their hands or whatever. But I thought that was interesting. But I've rambled on, so go ahead.
It took me a minute to figure out that that's what that was for. I kept going like, why am I lifting nothing up? But then I think when you get to the first boss, there's like 4 barrels you can throw at the boss, and then after that, you don't have anything to throw. Mm-hmm. And so at that point, I'm like, well, I got to get more barrels somehow. And so eventually I realized, if I can catch them. But it took me a minute to figure that out. But I did think that was a cool option. So other things worth noting, when you start the game, you can choose to either play as Goofy or Max. Or if you're in 2-player, you play as both. When you play in single player, you can have up to 2 items on you at once. When you play in 2-player, each character can only carry 1 item. And you have to work together in that way. Goofy and Max do play a little bit differently. Goofy is slower, where Max is faster. But Max has to throw projectiles at enemies. Not all enemies, but most enemies, like twice, whereas Goofy only has to do it once. He does like a one-hit kill thing. And so there's some variation there to keep them, playing a little bit differently than each other. But I thought that was kind of neat that one's faster than the other, but one, is a little more difficult to kill.
Weaker,
Right. But I mean, if you play 2-player, you can literally just have one of them stand there with a hook shot, stunning the person, while the other one goes and gets a barrel and comes over and just knocks them out, And so I feel like 2-player just makes it way more approachable and more strategic and stuff. So the hook shots are pretty cool because you can shoot across gaps, but then it like latches onto the hooks, therefore using your hook shot, and then you can walk across the rope that is permanently kind of stuck there.
So worth mentioning, there's multiple of that item you can just keep picking up.
Right. For a while there, I was like, wait, so if I use this, it's gone. But they do a pretty good job showing you, like, no, you get it back. And you also have to have keys used in your item slot, so you can't keep certain things if you have to carry a key.
True.
There was only a few times I had to backtrack to get a certain item, like a hook shot. But it wasn't too terrible, or usually I didn't have to backtrack very far to find something. So I did appreciate that. Lots of locked doors you got to get through. Some of them that are just things locked behind puzzles, where you have to move these cubes around by kicking them, and then eventually after you press all the levers, it opens up the door and you move on to the next part. And so those get increasingly more difficult. There's more projectiles being shot at you, or there's bad guys around that can also kick the tiles and squares around, which can become frustrating. Sometimes you just have to, you gotta leave and just reset the puzzle and come back. And so there's some good variation there.
One thing I really liked was just and little details, and I'm huge fan of little details that are unnecessary. But like if you try to kick a block that's stuck against a wall or an item, they'll stub their toe and kind of do a little animation where they hold their foot. So, completely unnecessary, but just those little things add a lot, in my opinion.
Totally. Let's see. I'm trying to think of what else. So there's a variety of weapons. There's the candle later that helps light up in certain dark areas. It makes the area bigger. There's a shovel that you can dig for, health and things. Mm-hmm. I didn't really use that a whole lot, but another interesting thing is fruit that you collect gives you additional hearts for to take hits.
Hit points, yeah.
Right, but if you collect enough of them, it gives you an extra life.
Yeah.
But then resets your hit points back to 0. And so it makes for kind of an interesting risk reward setup where it's like, well, do I want an extra life or do I want to run out, have 0 hit points now? And
it's
so
interesting. I didn't think of it that way, but you're right. Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's a little different. I'm not really used to seeing that.
No.
But kind of a cool idea, I guess. But I don't know. At the beginning of the game, I started out with a bunch of lives, and then toward the end, I was struggling to have any lives.
Yeah.
Especially if you have to use a password to get back to a certain level if you game over. So then once you password back in, you have no additional continues or lives, or you might have a couple lives, but yeah, as far as continues go, I don't think you start out with any. You have to collect new ones. So it makes for an interesting. Trying to figure that out. But difficulty-wise, it does get challenging, I would say, especially on your own. Because I just don't think this game was fully designed to be played by yourself. I think with 2 people, it's a lot more realistic that you could play through it. Mm-hmm. But on your own, I think, I don't know. I struggled. I think we both got our first game overs on the world level 2 boss.
Yeah.
And so... I think from there it does get a bit harder, but if you play it and you start to learn where things are and what puzzles do what, I could see it becoming a lot easier, in the long run.
Yeah, you can kind of fly through it. But yeah, some of the later puzzles, which again, I didn't play, but watching a long play, you're still trying to solve the puzzle while watching it. And some of those look really hard, some of the late game ones. So, classic block sliding and, slide this one to this position so that you can then slide another one next to it so it doesn't go all the way against the wall and, things like that type of puzzle. So,
yeah, and some of the variations of enemies towards the end become much more difficult in my opinion. And in certain parts, they just don't really equip you with any projectile, potted plants to throw and stuff.
Yeah.
And it
just becomes to avoid the enemies.
Right. It becomes a struggle at times. I got a little frustrated a couple times, but overall, not terrible. So, I mean, I'd put it maybe above halfway as far as difficulty spectrum goes.
Yeah, that's fair.
The bosses are relatively generic, and you just pick things up and throw them. But, I mean, like I said, we both came over it on boss 2, and so, but I think a good difficulty is a good challenge. I think the more you play it, though, I think the easier you'll have, especially in one player. I think it ups the challenge a little bit. So
totally. Yep. Anything else on the gameplay? Anything else there from you? I think I've pretty much said my bit on that.
I think we hit everything. It's relatively basic. Especially toward the end, not toward the end, but yeah, I think that's good.
I know what you meant. So next we'll just touch on the story. The game does have a little bit of a story. It's a little silly, but it works. It's classic Disney video game story. You want me just to kind of read through this story?
Yeah, let's hear it, buddy.
Might as well. All right. So, on a great day for fishing in Spoonerville, Goofy and his son Max go out to the sea. While fishing, they see a huge pirate ship heading towards Spoonerville with Pete and PJ kidnapped. Goofy tries to catch up with the ship but doesn't succeed until the ship lands on the pirates' island. Upon landing on the island and defeating a group of pirates, Goofy and Max learn that the pirates have mistaken Pete for their captain, Keelhaul Pete, who had been swallowed by a whale a long time ago. As Goofy and Max explore the island and are fighting pirates, Pete and PJ keep up the misconception as Pete enjoys being the Pirate King, which, to be fair, that sounds like something Pete would do. Yep. Eventually, Goofy and Max reach the pirate ship and see what appears to be Pete. Goofy attempts to save him but accidentally knocks him out. Max then realizes that the person they assume to be Pete is actually in fact the real Keelhaul Pete, having returned after the whale spat him out. Concerned with the safety of their next-door neighbors, Goofy and Max infiltrate the pirate ship, climaxing with another run-in with Keelhaul Pete himself. After defeating him, they find the real Pete and PJ about to be fed to an alligator, and they promptly rescue them. Suspending Keelhaul Pete over the alligator in their place, Goofy, Max, Pete, and PJ return to their fishing trip. So, a little silly, a little fun, but right in line with kind of the the characters.
Yeah, I'd say so. Yeah, I like the whole Pete being confused for Keelhaul Pete.
Yeah.
I thought that was kind of a unique-ish thing, where, there's a reason they got taken. They thought he was him or whatever. So I thought that was cool.
It works.
Do you know what PJ stands for?
I do not. I've never really given it any thought.
I don't know this for a fact, but I assume it's Pete Jr.
Oh, I bet you're right.
That would be my
In
thought.
fact, I feel like I've even heard that now that you've said it, but I'm not totally sure on that. But like, considering the character of Pete and how conceited he is, I would be willing to bet you're absolutely right.
Yeah, totally.
Nice. So next up, we've got the levels of the game. There's 5 of them. I don't know if you just want to run through those or discuss.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't spend too much time on them. We could just briefly just kind of hit on what they are and kind of what they look like, maybe.
Sure.
So.
Okay. So first level is the beach. So kind of as the story sets up, they kind of go to this island, and it's this tropical looking island, and there's water around and palm trees, and your kind of greens and tans / browns color palette.
Right.
I don't know, pretty beachy.
Yeah, there's some water hazards. You gotta find some wood to cross some bridges and things, I guess. So
yeah,
there's some different enemies. Oh wait, that's the next level. Never mind.
I was gonna say, kind of cool thing with some of the screens in this world, that I'm thinking about it. I don't remember seeing later in the game, but it's you'll come to a point where you enter the screen from the left, and you'll be on a little beach separated by water, and you can see stuff on the other side of the screen, but you can't get to it, so you have to actually go back and follow the logical layout of the map. And
right.
You can go kind of, go back to the left, go down, and then go to the right, and then go up, and you'll come back to that same screen and be on, a different part of it that you couldn't get to from the other entrance. So that's kind of cool.
Yeah.
Making the space line up correctly. Other than that, it's a beach. It's got some docks and stuff, like you said, that you can get some wood pieces to make little bridges, stuff like that. And it kind of moves then naturally into the next level, which is the jungle. And the jungle's kind of got this little bit darker greens to it, as if you're deeper into the island and there's less sunlight maybe.
Right.
For some reason, more standard trees rather than all palm trees. I guess it's just different vegetation. It's also got kind of more cliffs and dirty dirt, places where you can dig and dirt paths and stuff. So,
yeah. And oddly, this one has a lot of cave parts to it, which there's another cave part to this game. I don't know.
Yeah.
So it
Yeah,
just feels like they didn't really know what to do with the jungle part, but yeah, I don't know. I wish there was more. These two are pretty similar in levels.
They are.
They kind of feel like an extenuation
Yeah.
of each other, and so it's not until the next level that you really get a harsh tonal change, if you ask me.
Yeah.
So,
Yep. So the next level, there's a little cutscene in between the levels, and they show up at a castle that's just mysteriously in the middle of this pirate island. In between levels, also there's like a world map where you can kind of see the 5 levels as they are laid out on the island, which I thought was pretty cool. So yeah, you enter into the castle, and this one looks a lot like a Zelda dungeon.
Oh yes, it does.
And this is even when I was talking about at the beginning with the kind of top-down view where the walls all go towards the middle of the screen. This one looks a lot like the castle in A Link to the Past. So, it's got your grays and whatever of the stone, and then green flooring, purple flooring.
Yeah.
Pretty much that.
There's like the moving cannonball rooms where you have to like run along with the cannonballs.
Oh yeah,
like straight out of Link to the Past.
Super Zelda, yeah.
The dark areas where you have to have the candle and you can only light up a little bit. That's totally
straight out of Link to the Past. yeah, it's interesting, some of the similarities here, which is it is what it is. It's fine, but would have liked to see them maybe try and make it look a little different, but even the gaps with like the black holes that enemies could be knocked down into and stuff like that. I mean, it's just so Link to the Past. But what can you do? And even honestly, even the boss at the end of this one, the cow skeletons, they like take off their head and throw it at you. Just reminded me of something. The skeletons from A Link to the Past,
Totally.
Just the in-level enemies. But then next you move on to the cave, like you mentioned earlier. And this one, while it is slightly different than the cave in the jungle level, it is just sort of this kind of brown, darkish, grays and browns. Probably the weakest level visually, in my opinion. It does have some cool elements like minecarts and stuff, but
yeah, the minecarts is cool.
Wasn't super impressed with the use of or lack of color in the cave.
Yeah.
Looks like
it was kind of lackluster level. Just visually, it's pretty boring, I guess.
Yeah. Something we didn't really talk about in the gameplay was that there are different bosses at the end of each level. We kind of touched on it lightly in that we kind of died at them, but like this one in particular has an interesting boss at the end where it's like millipede caterpillar thing, and you're on kind of a hashtag for lack of a better description of it. It's kind of just this tic-tac-toe board where you've got 2 different colored centipedes coming at you, and for whatever reason these thumbtacks fall out of the sky or nails or something, and you throw them at this these things coming at you from different angles. And anyway, just each boss has got a slightly unique twist on it, but in general it's a matter of it'll provide you something to throw at some sort of boss. Some of them stationary, most of them stationary, kind of on a platform at the top of the screen, and for whatever reason this one's a little bit more unique than the others, so worth noting. I don't know, do you have anything else on the cave?
Nope.
Okay. And then the finale, the final level, and maybe something to critique about the game is it just only does have 5 levels, a little short. It's maybe like an hour and a half long game. The last level being the pirate ship, and I like this one. I always love pirate looking stuff, and this is a couple years before Donkey Kong Country 2. So yeah, it's got some cool water effects. It looks like the ship is moving, or that the waves are moving past in some parts, not a lot. Actually, kind of just maybe on 1 or 2 screens at the beginning of the level. But yeah, you kind of start coming out of the cave and boarding the ship. The ship looks nice, kind of gray and red. And then you start on the deck of the ship and then work your way into the ship, which is kind of cool. Then it gets kind of dark, it's like in the caves. And then,
there's a lot of like cavernous holes in the ship, oddly. There's one room that's really unique in that there's these holes in the floor, which isn't unique, and then like the holes shift, and so you have to like be careful because they'll shift back, and all of a sudden you'll be standing over a hole. There's one where you have to get from one cavern to the other side, and there's this platform that you have to step on that has arrows.
Yeah,
that
I was
makes
just looking
the
at that
platform, which is like the exact same thing from granted this was before it, Mario 64. That's what it makes me think of.
It is kind of like that. It's a little more puzzly because they change as you step on one.
Yeah.
So it's almost like a puzzle to solve. Essentially, it's a maze if you really think about it. It's kind of like like a blind maze, like go up, or I don't know any better way to describe it. It's kind of like go this way, go this way, go this way, and just get this thing to move in just the right way to get you across without backtracking or whatever. So.
And there's no jumping in this game.
No.
And so you can't just like get kind of close and then jump the rest of the way. You have to be able to walk off of it. So they definitely pull out some more challenging things here at the end.
Yeah. The capstan room puzzle is one of the hardest ones I think I saw. Not one that I played, but one that I watched. Like I said, one of my favorite YouTubers, he spent forever on that part, and it was just like, oh man, that looks. And I couldn't like I said, like even though I wasn't playing, I was still trying to look at the solution. Like, okay, well I would put this one here, this one here, this one here, but I couldn't figure it out any quicker than he could. So it's a tough one.
Yeah, when I looked on Game Facts, it had its own like how-to article that was just how to do that last one, and so it must be pretty difficult if people made their own guides for just that one puzzle.
Yeah.
Totally. So yeah, it's crazy.
So yeah, that's pretty much it. Like that's all the levels, and then as we said, it ends with you finding out that that's Keelhaul Pete is the real Keelhaul Pete. He's back from the belly of the whale. Very Pinocchio-ish and or
biblical.
I was gonna say Jonah.
Jonah, yes.
Yeah. So there you have it. I didn't watch the credits to this one for whatever reason. I usually do.
They're so boring and slow. They do one of those things where like they like show footage of you or like of the game, and then they like pause on a villain. But there's like 15 to like 25 seconds of footage before it pauses and tells the name of each enemy. And I got through like 2 of them, and I was like, I can't watch this. It's taking forever, and so I just like was like, nope. But
interesting. There's a credit.
I like that they.
Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say I like that they give bad guys names and credits. Like I think that's cool.
Mario
Donkey Kong
and
does
Donkey
it.
Kong.
Kirby.
Yep.
Yeah, they
Mario
all do
World.
it. Like I thought. Yeah, that's another one. I like that, but it was just way too slow.
Yeah.
So.
No, I just clicked into it on a long play that I've got. Scroll design is listed as a credit, like as a department. It's like,
wow.
Is that the text? Is that their translation for the text, or does that mean the screen scrolling? Like, is there a design for screen scrolling? Like, I don't know what that means.
Interesting.
No idea. But yeah, there's that. So.
Huh.
And one of the sound designers is literally listed as Elf. I don't know if that's a company or a person or what. So, yeah, it's interesting.
Huh. That's funny.
All right. But, yeah, that pretty much sums up Goof Troop for the Super Nintendo. Unless you've got anything else, we can probably jump into our final thoughts.
Nah, man. Let's do it.
Alrighty. So, final thoughts on this game for myself. It's a cool little game that's not something I normally would have played as far as style. I think if it wasn't a Disney Goof Troop property game, I probably wouldn't have wanted to play it. I'm not one for super hard puzzles in games. I like light puzzle elements like a Zelda, honestly. But I don't love the super late game complex puzzles that take too long to solve. Interestingly enough, Mario Maker is a game that I love, but when I get puzzle levels, I struggle really hard with them, and I just don't like, those single screen puzzle levels. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Not my favorite type of gameplay for whatever reason. I would rather play, if that makes sense, like do combat, do moving around or chain reaction type stuff, but yeah, deep thinking puzzles, not really my thing in video games. That said, I really enjoyed this game. I really like it. I do still kind of want to go back and play through and finish it. And that says a lot about it, that I wasn't, even though I got a game over in level 2, I wasn't super frustrated. I wanted to keep playing, and I think that's a testament to the little nuances of the gameplay, and there's enough variety in things you can do, and the item swapping and whatever, to make me want to keep playing it. I would recommend it. I think it looks great and plays great, sounds great, for the most part, other than the enemies dying, and I would recommend it. How about you?
Awesome. Yeah, I definitely recommend it as well. It really sounds interesting to you, go for it. I would maybe think twice if it's just on your own. But if you have somebody to play with, even more power to you to pick up a copy. I think it would. I mean, I didn't get to play it in 2-player, but from the research I did and watching other people play it in 2-player, I think it's just so much more fun. You throw stuff to each other. You can do these sweet like alley-oop things.
Yeah.
You can also kind of like daze each other, where you like hit each other in the head and you see stars. And so there's some fun to be had, and so. It's unique in that way. There's not a lot of games on this show that we're going to cover that have 2-player co-op at the same time. And so I like it for that. I love games where I can play with another person, even if I don't necessarily have someone to play with right now in my life. But, you know, it is what it is. It's totally Capcom. Visually, it's great. Audio is really well done too. And so, yeah, I mean, for the price and everything, I think this is totally a hidden gem, especially based off, you know, a cartoon TV show, a licensed game, you know, would think wouldn't be that great, but totally unique and, not what I would have expected from a Goof Troop game, but I think they did a pretty darn good job with it. So, I really enjoyed my time with it, even if it did get a little frustrating, playing on my own at times. So good times.
Indeed. Alrighty, well, I think with that we will end this episode here. So thank you everyone so much for joining us and listening to us. If you haven't already, give us a follow on Twitter at Mouse_Bytes, Bytes with a Y. That'll be your best source to kind of keep up with new episode releases and stuff like that. But you can also find us on thenintendovillage.com, and there we do have links to all the episodes, as well as our other shows that we have on the Nintendo Village. So check those out. We've got reviews and other similar types of shows like this, but with other Nintendo-focused content. Our episodes are on the Nintendo Village YouTube, so if you want to see gameplay for these episodes, you can see that there. And we're on pretty much all major podcasting outlets. So with that, thank you again, and join us next time for our episode all about Disney Magical World for the Nintendo 3DS. With that, everybody, have a great rest of your day.
See you guys.
And remember, report to the Goof Troop.
Thank you so much for watching. Be sure to subscribe, check out some of our other videos, and visit thenintendovillage.com, your home for everything Nintendo.